Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I have a super cute card to share with you today. This one is for one of my friends who wanted to send her very best friend a card, and I was more than happy to help her out with this one. So to start, I used my Cricut to cut out a bit of a beehive shape and a whole bunch of hexagons. I haven't included how I did that. I really should remember to screen record some of those things, but basically all I did was put up a couple of hexagons, made sure I was happy with the space between them, and then I just duplicated them until I had enough pretty much to cover the card base. So I had a bit extra. As you can see here, I used a scrap piece of paper and the crafty gods were obviously on my side. Did you see how close that trim was? This is going to be on my card base. So as you can see, I used the little fireflies for these. I know that Lawn Fawn has sets with bees in them. However, I don't own any of them at the moment. So I thought these little fireflies were really cute. They were the right size. They were kind of the right shape. All I needed to do was add some extra lines to them and they were perfect little bees. I didn't use many Copics for this one. I just mostly used my old alcohol markers. So I used a lemon yellow for this. It's just a really bold, bright yellow. There's not a lot of shading with these. These creatures are very small, and although shading probably would have looked good, I just didn't really feel like it was necessary for this card. I wanted to keep it simple and focus mostly on the background. Once I was done with the yellow, I moved on to a black marker. This is where I drew in that extra line just to make my bee look a little bit stripy. As with every little creature that I colour in, they had to have cheeks, and my R20 Copic marker just seems to be perfect for adding tiny little pink cheeks to everything. Once that was done, I then went in with my white Jelly Roll pen. I think I used the 0.5 for these because they're so tiny, adding little white dots to their eyes, their cheeks, and some lines on the side to give them a little bit more detail. These are just so cute. I can't believe I've never really used this set before, and I've never turned them into bees before. I think I'm going to have to do this about a million more times to get it out of my system. They're just so cute. So this is the only shading I did on this. I used a cool grey marker, a really light one for the wings, and I just went in wherever there would be a shadow. Just one simple line, that's all they needed. I then went over the entire wing with my Wink of Stella brush pen just to make them shiny. It was then time to get started on my background. I have been a huge fan of these water pigments. They are beautiful. This time I went in with a darker color, the red gold. I thought maybe because it was kind of a honey color, it would work really well. I haven't used it much and it's still a little bit too dark. I still haven't come across a project where I would use that one yet. So I did just a few flicks of that, and then I went in with a yellow gold, and that was the perfect color for this. And I just kept going until most of the background was covered. As this is a shaker card, I've been trialing this way of making those little shaker windows. So that's just a screenshot of my Cricut design space, and this is what it cut. These rectangles are measured to fit my card base and to fit under that background that I had just put paint all over. When it comes to making shakers like this, I find that they're perfect because they're machine cut, and then the only errors in these are my own human error. So all I have to really do is glue them one on top of each other, and here I'm just popping some glue on the inside and rubbing that with my finger the whole way around so that it fills in any little gaps, because I always have a sequin that decides to find its forever home on the first shake. So with that all sealed, I'm finding that my shaker cards are just working a lot better. Nothing is getting stuck. They're all nice and smooth. It just seems to be the best method for me at the moment. So here we have those stitched scalloped windows. I have said them correctly before in another video. I think they're the reverse stitched scallop windows. Anyway, they're my favorite. They're like one of those things that are on my must-have list to make shaker cards. I love the window and the frame that they create in that one cut. So when I made the circles on my Cricut design space, I made them to be slightly bigger than what that die cut would create, so that you won't see it when you look down on top. You won't see any of the sides of the shaker pocket that I made. It's just going to be the window and then down to the bottom of the card. I really hope that made sense. It didn't really make sense out loud, but I hope at the end you'll see what I mean by that. Here I am just trimming down some of the excess that I wouldn't need of that, I'm going to call it honeycomb, because it looks like honeycomb, and this layer is going to be right below that top layer of card and above my acetate for my shaker windows. So you won't see the edges of it because it's under that top piece, and none of my little sequins and that will get stuck on it because it's not under the acetate in amongst all the little shaker pieces. Before I can add my shaker elements to this card, I needed to glue this whole piece down. So this is just all those layers of those circles glued together. I stuck them down to the card base with a mix of double-sided tape and glue. Here I am just gluing the very edges around inside the circles so that is properly adhered to the bottom and so that there's no little gaps for those sequins to get stuck in. Using my Oliver Stitched ABC dies, my favorite alphabet die set ever. I've seen so many people in the Lawn Fawn Addicts group talking about whether they should get this set or not. Honestly, I've used it more. I think I've like well and truly gotten my money's worth out of it already. If it's on your wish list, I say treat yourself and get it. It is amazing. I think there's maybe only 2 or 3 projects where I haven't used it since I bought them. And as you can see, I've cut out the word B with these. Now I needed an N because the sentiment we were using with this was been meaning to say. So I found an N in the word Halloween from one of those village sets, and here I am trying to just stamp the N onto one of my little honeycomb hexagons. Now the other part of this sentiment comes from the jelly bean set, one of those shaker sets from a long time ago. Was it How You Been? If you know it, you know what I'm talking about. Which says been meaning to say, and bean is in jelly bean, so it wasn't what I needed, so I just needed to stamp this bit and not put ink on the bean in that set, if that makes sense, and stamp it onto this background. And I decided to do it now before I did too much decoration on this background because I had to stamp it and I was worried that I was going to get it all messy and ruin it. Luckily I didn't though, so then it was time to move on and stick all these things down. To add a bit of dimension to the front of this card, I wanted the B to be raised up, so I used my itty bitty foam squares and I cut them in half before I peel them. I'm finding that is nice and easy and saves a lot of time than pulling one off and trimming it to whatever size. Just cutting them as they are and then sticking them on has been saving me lots of time. So I stuck them on, lined them up nice and neatly before putting the N with them. The thing I love about these hexagons is that they had no choice but to line up perfectly. My machine had cut them and it's just the shape that they are. They just work so beautifully. So I used a bunch of them. I wasn't going to waste the ones that had been the inside pieces to my honeycomb. I thought I can definitely get some use out of them. And I was inspired to use them as part of my background. Just like one of my crafty friends, Peter from Peter's Treasury, has used very recently in a card that he made with bees. So I'm going to make sure I pop his YouTube below. He hasn't done a video on this, but he does have it on his Instagram, and it is a really, really cute card. His work is definitely worth checking out. Just for a bit of continuity with this background, I didn't feel like using the offcuts from the die, the window die that I used. I decided instead to just put some of the paint on the very bottom of my background of this. As much as I do love using those pieces sometimes, with it being scalloped, I find it tricky to get it perfectly lined up so that when you look at the card from all angles, I don't like seeing bits and pieces around the edge or maybe not having them lined up perfectly, so I just find this to be much easier. I ran my powder tool through the whole area of these windows to reduce static. I didn't want anything sticking. None of these little pieces were going to have an excuse to stick. And these are the shaker elements that I decided to use for this. I used some yellow sequins, some black seed beads, a whole bunch of just plain iridescent sequins, and these little flowers, which I think are actually corn. I have like heaps of these sets of tiny little Fimo rods from years and years and years ago, and I thought there's no way I'm ever going to use these. But they've been in one of my crafting drawers for a very long time, and I thought this is actually one of those times where it's going to be perfect to use them. I used a mix of my tape runner and some glue to make sure that there was enough adhesive around these things so that none of these sequins or beads were going to sneak out. And then I just can't help it. I am so tempted. I just have to give it a shake to see if it works. I stuck my honeycomb pieces on the back of that top piece of card that I had decorated with the splatters and the sentiment, and then just started using a whole bunch of really strong double-sided tape to, I guess, stick them down a bit better because I could only stick them down with little bits of glue, and then this would be put on top of my shaker windows to really sandwich it down and adhere it all really well. This part was really fun. I then used some more of those little hexagons to decorate more of the background. I used some foam tape behind some of them to give a few of them dimension, just to mix things up a bit, and then I put on my little bees. Going back and using that yellow gold watercolor pigment, I then wet it down and used just a little bit on all of the hexagons to kind of make it look like it was dripping with honey. And there we have it, card complete. I am so happy with this. I'm usually not a big fan of yellow, so to have a card that is mostly yellow is very different for me. I really think it turned out good, and I hope the recipient loves it as much as I do. This is a really hard one to let go of. If this is your first time with us here, please don't forget to subscribe or give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this card and would like to see more like this. Thank you so much for stopping by and watching. See you next time.